You are listening to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast, a podcast for Freemasons and the public, bringing you to light through discussions and research papers about Australian Freemasonry and the Victorian jurisdiction in particular.
Welcome back to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast. I'm your host, Brother Jack Aquilina, and welcome to episode 11 of the podcast, which is entitled, Is Freemasonry Inherently Conservative? We have a fantastic episode today. It's going to be one of our first, or probably second, contested discussions, which is going to involve a debate between Brother Lucas Crandles and Brother Brendan McCallum about, is Freemasonry conservative? Brother Lucas is going to be arguing that Freemasonry is inherently conservative, and Brother Brendan is going to be arguing that it is progressive. But it'll be very interesting, and being able to mediate that discussion, we've been able to sort of hear some really fantastic arguments about what it is that Freemasonry does, how it's developed over time, and where it's heading, which is going to be very interesting. But before we get to that discussion, I'm very lucky today to be joined by my brother, not just my Masonic brother, but my real brother, Brother Paul Aquilina, who was recently initiated into the Brunswick United Lodge. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Hey, good to be here, Jack.
It's good to finally have you on, Paul. I mean, I guess you've seen all the work that's been done behind the scenes, and I know for a fact that you've been really involved with our YouTube page and obviously promoting the podcast. So it must be sort of a bit different to be behind the mic this time.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to explain considering there's so much going on so quickly in my career of Freemasonry, and it's been so full on and amazing that it's hard to get my head around the whole process.
Absolutely, and as they say, everyone reminds me, don't push him. And the funny thing is, I don't have to push you, Paul. You keep wanting to come out and see things, and you've seen how many first degrees you've seen now? 2.
Yeah, we've seen one real first degree and one demonstration, which was also really good. But yeah, as far as doing things, I love being involved. I love getting involved with all the process, installations, initiations, all the rest. Anything that would come my way, I'm happy to take on at the moment.
Exactly right. And so you were initiated on, I think it was the 16th of August, and you had a fantastic night. You had the most worshipful Grand Master, Donald Reynolds of Victoria there. And more importantly, as important it is as having a Grand Master there, you had 107 brethren. You're supposed to be a joint first, and it ended up being a single first because the other person didn't rock up. It must have been, there's always big joining Freemasonry, I know from my own experience, but it must have even been bigger for you knowing that you're going to have quite a few people there. How did you feel leading up to when you joined?
Oh, I was extremely nervous, but it was one of them things I didn't know how lucky I was to be there with so many people supporting me as well, especially so many big names. So getting to witness another couple first degrees, it's really amazing to see how many people came up and supported me through that process. It was really good. Yeah,
and thank you to everyone who did, and to all those brethren overseas and interstate, or people who are even in Victoria who are unavailable who sent their apologies. I know that on the same night there was an installation at another lodge in the district, so a few people attended that, which was fine. So there was quite a few apologies. So you could have even had a bigger crowd, but either way, the numbers in the room isn't important. The important thing is that you had a great night. I know that for me it was an honour to be able to sort of walk you around the lodge room as the deacon and sort of take you through the ceremony, and it'll be very memorable for all of us. And like you said, I think that it is one of those things where you've enjoyed the journey so far, and I hope that you enjoy it further. I mean, one thing that I want our listeners to sort of be aware is, sort of get an understanding of, is how did you join Freemasonry? I know that I'm your brother and you had family in Freemasonry, but obviously, as I've told people probably on this podcast before, I never asked you to join. You sort of joined off your own back, and you asked me what it was all about, and what sparked your curiosity? What made you interested in Freemasonry?
See, Jack, you were just a stepping stone as far as getting into Freemasonry, because I saw how much fun you were having, and how many people you were seeing, and how many people you were enjoying company, and that immediately gained my interest. And so I went online and I searched what it's all about, and the more I looked into it, the more I wanted to be a part of it. Yeah, I never looked back from there. It's all been good times and good fun with the boys. That's how I got into Freemasonry.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things, isn't it? You look online and you see a lot of stuff. And how did you sort of distinguish between fact and rubbish? I mean, I sort of tried to give you a little bit of idea of why some of it wasn't correct, but
as far as conspiracies, it's hard to believe them when you start hearing that people are vampires and they turn into werewolves after a certain day, and then so you look for legitimate sites. So I look for obviously the United Grand Lodge website, and I looked at a few people's actual opinion on it, and you can tell when people are a lot more genuine. They're trying to stir the pot. But yeah, no, I looked in at official sources and stuff like that to get a real indicator of where Freemason was headed.
Yeah, and did the and I know that you've been involved in some of the episodes we've produced here for the Brought to Light Masonic podcast. Has being exposed to some of the people we've interviewed, and I know that you're all there for the interview we did last week with Most Worshipful Brother Hillel Benedict. Was meeting those sorts of people sort of give you an idea of what it was about? What was the moment where you sort of had an exposure to Freemasons and decided this is the sort of people I want to be around?
Oh, really, my initiation. My first night was when I really thought, this is what I want to do. This is something that I want to be a part of. And that was a big distinguisher from what I thought it would be and what it actually is. And I thought it would be good, but I didn't realise it would be that fun. And
the ritual is different, isn't it? I mean, I know that you went to, Paul and I went to the installation for Worshipful Brother Dominic Donato. He's a Worshipful Master of Garibaldi Lodge here in Victoria, which is an Italian lodge. They work the Victorian Constitution, but they have sort of an Italian heritage to them. And we went to their installation. It may as well have been a grand installation. There was a lot of people there. We had a great sort of weekend out of it, didn't we? And I guess you see that side, you enjoy that side, but then when you see the ritual, it's like, wow, I didn't expect that to happen. Yeah,
it's something so far left field as far as what we do today in our normal day-to-day activities. That is something that you really want to be a part of, considering I can't see many places which abide by so strict rules and so strict principles.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's all about, it's something different, and I guess that's what I hoped you'd get out of it, something different, and it's a long journey to go, but I mean, do it at your own pace, and I guess, do your journey in Freemasonry be very different to everyone else's, as everyone's journey tends to be. Like I said in the first episode of this podcast, Freemasonry is a reflection of your life, and everyone's life is different, so the journey through Freemasonry is naturally different. So good luck, congratulations for joining, and it's as your brother, I'll be watching on, and as your brother, I'll be making sure that you enjoy your experiences as much as you can. But like I said, I know that I was a bit reserved about Freemasonry when you first asked me about it, and I'll continue to do that reserved approach, because I know that what you necessarily want to get out of it will be your own thing. So hopefully you can, I know that you'll chart your own journey. So it'll be very, very interesting to see how you go.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Jack.
Yeah, no problem. Well, look, thank you for coming on today, Paul. Well, what we're going to do now is we're going to let our listeners have a chance to listen to that wonderful discussion that Brendan and Lucas had about, is Freemasonry inherently conservative? You caught a snippet of it. Are our listeners up for something interesting?
They're up for a good debate, and it's good fun.
That's good. And all right, well, without further ado, we'll get straight stuck into our discussion between Brother Lucas Crandles and Brother Brendan McCallum and myself, and we'll be discussing, is Freemasonry inherently conservative? Well, welcome to our interview, or debate, I guess. What do you call it, Brendan? A contested discussion, I've been calling them up to this point, between Brendan McCallum and Lucas Crandles. We'll be talking about the topic of, is Freemasonry inherently conservative? It's a very interesting question. It's good to have you back on, Brendan. Welcome back to the Brought to Light Masonic podcast.
It's good to see you again, Jack. Thanks for having me.
It's good. And look, for our listeners out there, we do have someone new for you today, which is very exciting. We have Brother Lucas Crandles of the Brunswick United Lodge, and he's come on board. He's actually quite influential on this podcast. Behind the scenes, he does all the what do they call it, post-production and editing, and make sure that what we say isn't too controversial. So thanks to you, Lucas, you've kept us out of trouble. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Jack. Post-production's not my forte, so I apologise to the listeners if it's not a great mix.
No, I'm sure it sounds fantastic. I mean, I think one of the things that I love about what you do is that you do it at 3 o'clock in the morning, which is about the same time I'm awake anyway. So.
It's true. You never miss an email at about 4 a.m.
No, it's true.
The instant reply, which I always appreciate.
Which is good. So we're on the same level there. But look, Lucas, just what we send, as you know, what we tend to do with our guests is we try to get our listeners to know who they are and what some of their stories are. So who are you, and where'd you come from, and why did you join Freemasonry?
Right, okay. The direct answer to that question has to do with your other guests. It's Brendan. Brendan and I have been friends for quite some time. And I met Brendan because he and I were working on a television show together. It was a television pilot called The Weatherman that myself and a friend co-created. And Brendan was one of the lead actors in it. And as a result of that, he and I became fast friends, and he joined Masonry, introduced me to it probably 3 months later, and that's how I came to be at Brunswick United 924. So as you can probably ascertain from that, my background is film and television, and I run a Melbourne-based production company. I'm writer-director, and I go back and forth to the United States with some of my work when I can.
So basically, we've got you to thank, Brendan, for the curse you've put onto Freemasonry.
Well, yes, I've unleashed the crayon on you all.
Exactly.
Well, look, I like it to an extent. It's like a guilty pleasure, eating chocolate in the morning, about the time you're sending me emails. Look, let's talk about your Masonic background. You obviously joined the Brunswick United Lodge because obviously Brendan's a member there, and there's also some other cool guys there as well. When were you initiated? You were initiated not long ago, were you?
Not too long ago. I guess it's probably worth mentioning as well. I was way back. I'm 31 now, but when I was in my early 20s, I was in the Army, and I was at the Australian Defence Force Academy. And at that point, I was making inquiries to join the lodge in Canberra, the Army lodge that they had up there. So my interest in it has been, for a very long time, and it's something that just sort of I ended up leaving Canberra, ended up leaving the Army, so it kind of waned a little bit. But when Brendan brought it up with me, it was straight away. So it's something I've always wanted to do, absolutely. So initiation for me, I think, was late 2014, and I've been a Master Mason just not too long at all now, about a year.
Yeah, and you obviously, I know that the big build-up to the third degree, everyone experiences it, and I understand that you did a similar route to me. You had your third degree farmed out to another lodge, and I remember the night, and you had a lot of fun, and by the looks of it, you haven't turned back. You've enjoyed Freemasonry the whole time you've been involved, and it's one of those things, isn't it? What brought you? So you obviously had an interest in Freemasonry since you were in the Army, and Brendan was able to open that door to let you sort of finally take the leap and join. But what aspects of Freemasonry attracted you? Was it the brotherhood? Was it some of the esoteric research? What was it that brought you along?
It was, a combination of those things. I guess I went to an all-boys school, and we had it's an old school, established in Victoria in the sort of 1870s. And it had a lot of tradition and a lot of, singing songs and hymns and sort of, ancient customs and that sort of stuff like that. And I found that when I came out of both that and the military, that there was sort of a kind of a hole in my life where that sort of fraternal bonding centered around a traditional kind of framework wasn't there anymore. And I was at university and everything else like that, and it was all very laissez-faire and just sort of not very structured and stuff like that. So I found myself sort of gravitating towards wanting to find that again. And then coupled with that, I was always interested in the esoteric side and in the history of it. I mean, so many of the people I admire throughout history, particularly the founding fathers of the United States and everything else like that, were Masons. So I thought, if this is something that those people that I admire so much were into, there's got to be something to it.
Well, that's very fascinating, and I hope our listeners enjoyed getting an idea of who you are. I know that and I've always found you fascinating, and we get along on a lot of levels, and I know that one of the great things about Freemasonry is its diversity. And talking about diversity, this is the whole concept of today's discussion. What we thought we'd do is a lot of other podcasts, they tend to do either research papers or casual discussions. We've tried to change it up a little bit. As you would have seen with last week's episode, we had a bit of a contested discussion with some people from Le Droit Humain, who are a co-masonry body, and we really delved into some of those really deep issues about women and Freemasonry. So we thought we'd change it up a bit as well and talk about something that traditionally Freemasonry isn't associated with, which is political philosophy. And I say political philosophy because the topic of today, as I mentioned, is about conservatism and progressive thinking. And both of these things are ingrained in political philosophy. What we're going to do is we're going to get Brendan and Lucas to sort of share their views. Brendan's going to be arguing in favour of the contention that Freemasonry is progressive, the progressive institution. And Lucas, you're going to be arguing that Freemasonry is inherently conservative, which will be very interesting. Now, the views here expressed are not the views of any Grand Lodge body, nor are they the views of any organisation or political party. So please take it with a grain of salt. The whole concept of this discussion is to open your mind about Freemasonry as an organisation, as a cultural group, and it might vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but we're going to be talking specifically from what we've experienced here in Victoria. So, conservatism. What is conservatism? Just so our listeners know who aren't astute in political philosophy, conservatism itself is a very contested idea. I'll give you my version of it, and we might invite Lucas and Brendan to share their views of conservatism. Conservatism is a political, philosophical tradition that incorporates a number of ideological bents. It might be conservatism as in a conservation or preservation of the status quo. That's the most sort of basic example. But it also includes, in a political sense, the traditions of economic rationalism, most recently, social conservatism being a preservation for institutions that have stood the test of time, as the narrative tends to be. So examples of that would be a social conservative would be anti-marriage equality, would be probably anti changes to institutional structures such as the Church of England in England. They wouldn't be in favour of abolishing that. They'd be probably monarchists. They wouldn't be in favour of changing that. So that's a social conservative or an institutional conservative. Whereas the other blend of conservatism is economic rationalism and liberty. This concept of each, like you said, the founding fathers of the United States are a good example of this. Each person being able to pursue their economic interests without interference from government. So that's some of the traditions that meet conservatism. But today, I guess, Lucas, you'll be focusing on conservatism in its institutional and cultural sense. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's mainly the area I'll be focusing on. I'll just add as well, I think, there's a direct link as well between, certainly as we define conservatism, with the classical liberal sort of ideology, which is individualist rather than collectivist. And I think that ties into Masonry, but I'll make that point later on.
Yeah, so the distinction would be collectivism versus individualism, and although some say that conservatives can be quite collective as well, but you're focusing on that aspect of it. And Brendan, I might give you an opportunity to give your views on what progressive thinking is. It's obviously a very well-used term. What would you say progressivism is?
I would sketch up progressivism as being a political position that it tries to encourage as much opportunity for all, that tries to redress issues of social imbalance or oppression. It tries to work against structural imbalances within the society and culture. That tries to enable people who may not have the same access to opportunities as, say, people who are more economically favoured in terms of their upbringing, their past. It is about sort of establishing more of a level playing field, I think, in the social sphere, and it's about ensuring that everyone has equal and fair access to have their voice heard in the cultural sphere.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary of what progressive policies and philosophy tries to attain. I think that one of the main things is that progressivism isn't adverse to change. In fact, they embrace change quite significantly, which is an interesting sort of cultural perspective. Progressive politics, that is interested and concerned with the advancement of society through evolutionary change, which seeks to adopt principles of collective action, equality of outcome generally, sometimes equality of opportunity, and also the concept that people are inherently going to be exploited by certain sections of society, and there's a role for institutions or governments to mediate that and make it a level playing field. So I think that's a good summary of progressivism. But just to confirm, today you'll be focusing on progressive culture and practices. Is that right?
Sure.
Yeah, in terms of how you're going to entwine into Freemasonry. So I hope for our listeners you've got a good sense of what conservatism as a cultural perspective is and what progressivism is as a cultural perspective, and how that's going to frame the debate today. So basically, what we're going to do is we're going to let Lucas set off the batting, and he's going to be giving us, what is it, a 5-minute rant you've got prepared there?
Yeah, just yep.
Beautiful, and I hope you all enjoy what Lucas is about to say. He's going to set up the argument in favour of the idea that Freemasonry is inherently conservative. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Well, I think that's a great setup for the definitions. I'll just add one more definition. I'm sure all Masons are familiar with the term Freemasonry, the mantra of it being a progressive science. I just want to make it clear that I think most Masons would interpret that as the literal sense of the word progressive, not political, and that means developing in stages over time. So I don't think that that argument can be used in favour of it being a progressive politically. But to be clear from the get-go, Masonry doesn't exclude anyone on the basis of their political beliefs, status or income, and it's not intrinsically elitist. So that's worth establishing from the get-go. Brendan and I are prime examples of this. We have literally polar opposite political viewpoints. We've had many fireside debates and arguments, and yet we remain great friends and bonded brothers. So I'm going to argue that simply as an institution, Masonry does tend to be inherently conservative. I'll also concede this very important point, and that is at the time of its inception, Masonry would have been considered very progressive to the point of being revolutionary. The idea of accepting multiple faiths in the 18th century to a fraternal order is incredibly forward-thinking for that time. But what I'm really talking about is Freemasonry today. So if we look at the history of Freemasonry in Australia, we find 11 prime ministers have been Freemasons, and to my knowledge, all of them have been one or another kind of conservative. In some cases, extremely conservative. Sir George Reed was a radical anti-socialist from the Anti-Socialist Party. Viscount Stanley Melbourne Bruce was in the Nationalist Party, not the National Party, but the Nationalist Party. And Robert Menzies and all the rest were either Liberals or Nationals. For our foreign listeners, the Liberal Party, this can be confusing for Americans, our Liberal Party is our Conservative Party. So the Labor Party is our left-leaning and our centre-right party is our Liberal Party. Now you'll find of the dozens of state premiers across Australia's history, with Masonic connection, that virtually all of those as well were Conservative or in the National Party. Now, this is not just unique to Australia. I couldn't find a great deal about the American system, but in the UK in particular, I can quote from The Independent, an article called Conservatives at the Heart of Freemasonry. Now, they say 9 MPs and former MPs hold posts in the highest ranks of the Freemasons, and with just one exception, they are all conservative Tories. So there seems to be a pretty universal theme, particularly within the political sphere. And this is just an anecdotal example, but my ex-partner, who was Scottish, her father was a Scottish trade unionist, and he'd written books about it, very successful, and he was very much on the left side of politics. And when he learned that I was becoming a Freemason a few years ago, he was appalled. And he described it to me, and I was quite taken aback by this. He described it to me as a Tory enterprise. And again, I don't know the extent to which that applies in the US or Australia, but certainly the way he was describing it to me and the way I've heard it described by others in the UK, it is tied to Tories and the conservative side of politics. So I think that's very interesting. And maybe there's some class stuff going on in England that's not so present in Australia, but it's definitely there. Again, this is probably a little bit anecdotal, but statistically, young people tend to be progressively inclined politically. I mean, that's borne out of a number of studies. Older people tend to be more conservative. Young people tend to be more left-leaning. But it's my experience, and I probably can safely assume, Jack and Brendan, that is probably your experience in the limited number of lodges that I've visited, that the people in my age group, your age group, and younger, what we call the millennials, are vastly overrepresented as conservatives compared to what they would be if you just walked into a university or anywhere else. And I guess that beckons the question, why? And I think the reason is it's traditionalism. I think there's a resurgence to reclaim identity in a globalist world. We want to find meaning via ancestry, by history, by tradition, and we long for a fraternal organisation, something that's so incredibly rare in this day and age. The idea of men, by voluntary association, meeting with other men and only men, is almost antithetical to modern social convention. I would actually hazard that if you were trying to create an order or a society or a group like that now from scratch without the history of Freemasonry, there would be outcry, and people would reject that on its premise. Now, the mere fact that it is one of our core tenets to be for men only, I think speaks volumes to the conservative nature of Masonry. And of course, you've had these debates back and forth about whether that should change, but it remains, and certainly in Australia and most Masonry in the world, to be a male-only order. I add to that the fact that we bar atheists from entry, and you have a pretty clear picture of an organisation that takes very seriously indeed its charge to protect and maintain long-standing traditions and customs, which conservatism is by definition. It is to conserve, it is to preserve. Now, also worth noting is that Freemasonry is inherently quite static, and I think this is a very important point. Its traditions are set, for the most part, in place, and they can't be tampered with without significant backlash. Now, I quote from Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, quote, "Our Freemasonry is undoubtedly a progressive science, and yet the fundamental principles of Masonry are the same now as they were at the very beginning of the institution. Its landmarks are unchangeable. In these, there can be no alteration, no diminution, no addition." So it's an organization so rigid in its unalterable principles, it's surely one that by definition must be rigidly conservative. Indeed, the very nature of what we wear to lodge is indicative of our conservatism. We don't turn up to lodge meetings in flip-flops and shorts. We wear fine suits, bow ties, white gloves. We make an enormous effort to look distinguished, the very opposite of casual, and therefore the very opposite of the anti-establishment attitude that we would often associate with rebellious or young left leaning people. Many of us wear tuxedos or long coats with tails, so that's even further back, even more traditional, harking back to that earlier age, and it's further evidence of a yearning for that traditionalist and conservative sort of past. Now, it's worth noting that meeting on the level, parting on the square, these core tenets of Masonry are not evidence against its conservative nature. Conservatism does not mean elitism, as I alluded to before. In the classical liberal sense, perhaps the truest definition of conservatism is individualism and liberty reigning supreme. And so it follows that all brethren, whether they're kings or plumbers, should be afforded equal respect regardless of their background. So with all this evidence, I think it's undeniable that Freemasonry is inherently traditionalist, largely static, and proudly conservative as an institution, and personally, I wouldn't want it any other way.
Well, thank you very much for that comprehensive rant. I think it was one of the more informative rants I've heard you make, Lucas. Look, I think there's some fantastic points you've made there. I've got a few ideas about some sort of devil advocate proposals against what you've said, but I think I'll invite Brendan to give his initial reaction.
Well, look, I mean, it's a very robust and considered opening argument from Lucas, and it's tricky to unpack and to really dispute the core assertion that Freemasonry is inherently conservative in terms of how it presents itself to the world today or how it's composed today. And certainly if you look at the constitutions and the charges that define what Freemasonry is and how they've been upheld as sacred and inviolable since effectively time immemorial, then yes, that's an argument that it's an institution that seeks to preserve and conserve its composition in perpetuity as best as it can. But I think it's important to sort of separate a certain institutional conservatism from what Freemasonry actually enables on the individual and collective level among its practitioners. I think that the funny thing is that in a lot of ways joining a lodge today is almost an act of radicalism in and of itself, given that there was such a long, slow decline and the notion that Freemasonry was somehow out of date or of a time past, and yet more and more young people are joining it, and they're joining it because they have a sense that there is more to the life that they're leading than the simple status quo that they find themselves surrounded by. And so on an individual level, which is I think where inherently Freemasonry finds its greatest strength, is in the so-called progressive science of learning about and discovering the self. On that individual level, I think that it remains or at the very least should be considered as an extremely progressive practice to engage in. In terms of exploring oneself and finding what it is or what's important about being a person in society or a man in society. I mean, look, the strongest argument against Freemasonry as a progressive institution is its continued position that women have no place in lodge. Personally, that's a position that I'm quite comfortable with, which may not sound terribly progressive, but I think we're at a very strange point in history where a lot of formally given notions of what constitutes traditionalism and what constitutes progressivism are getting a little bit confused. The poles are dancing a bit around what were once commonly accepted definitions in that regard, I think.
Look, I think that's a very fair set of points you've made, and what you've both done is you've both unpacked quite a few ideas, which we're going to go back to in detail now. We'll try and go through them individually. But I think the main distinction you made there, Brendan, which is really important, is Freemasonry as an organisational institution versus Freemasonry as in some of the principles, values, and lessons that we teach in our rituals and ceremonies. I think there's a big distinction there. Would you concede that there's a distinction there, Lucas?
Yeah, I do believe there is.
Beautiful. All right, well, let's unpack some ideas. The first thing I want to talk about is this concept of Freemasonry's origin versus some of the interpretations you put. So I'm just going to play devil's advocate here. Now, Lucas, you're talking about how Freemasonry, comparatively today, in terms of its insistence on a belief in a supreme being, the way we dress, the way we act, all these things. Perhaps maybe, I think it could be conceded that maybe that could be viewed through the prism of today's standards as being quite conservative. But I guess a devil's advocate would put to you is you need to view these things through the context of their origins through history. I mean, at a time when Freemasonry was created, it was at a period where the aspiration of society was seen to become not only a gentleman or someone with good moral values and strong character, but the whole concept of dressing up in dinner suits, the whole concept of having material substance, such as dinner suits and all that, that would be a reflection of maybe perhaps an aspiration rather than a inherent conservative culture. Simply by the fact that when Freemasons was created, the poorest of society were illiterate, most of the time didn't have, hardly had food on the table, and the concept of being able to meet on the level with other aristocrats and to be able to wear their clothes and to do such things would indicate maybe that it's a lot more progressive than what you're insisting, or maybe that'd be another way of viewing it. What do you say to that sort of concept of viewing Freemasonry through the cultural and political circumstances of the time in which it was created?
Well, I think that's probably evidence to my point, and I totally agree with it. But that's sort of precisely what we're talking about. The fact that, looking back to those dinner suits, to the history, to the maintenance of tradition that we're talking about is an inherently conservative idea. Progressivism, by contrast, is always looking forward, is always looking for change, always looking for new ways to do things. And conservatism, by and large, is looking at the past, the lessons we can learn, and trying to maintain some of those things that we consider important for social order or for political order or anything else. So the idea that we culturally maintain these practices as Freemasons, I think, is a perfect example of it being conservative. And what Brendan said before, I think, is really interesting, that doing that today is actually a radical act. I would suggest it's kind of, in a strange way, radically conservative, because it's so outside of the norm that people embracing that sort of thing are, I guess you could call them radically conservative.
Do you have anything to say on that?
Look, I don't think so. Not necessarily. Radical conservatism, I view through a slightly different lens. That, to me personally, is more aligned with homogenization of the religious experience. A one way of viewing, say economic rationalism or neoliberalism. That to me is radical conservatism. The notion of putting on a tuxedo and going off to lodge and having a roast meal at the end of it. It doesn't even remotely constitute radically conservative behaviour to me. I do understand the point that you're trying to get across, but again, I bring it back to the notion that on the individual level, at least, what I'm arguing more is that Freemasonry has the inherent potential to enable progressive behaviour on the part of its adherents. Mm-hmm. You go to lodge and you learn how to become a better person. You learn how to become a better man. Now, some might take that to different, ends, but for me, on a personal level, not to make it personal, obviously we're debating, things that are larger than simply the personal sphere, but to me, it's about, what can I do with this $5? Can I maybe put that towards, a nice meal at the end of the week, or can I buy a sandwich for this homeless man on the street corner? Now, that to me is a progressive act. It's an act of self-sacrifice, and it's an act of leveling a set of circumstances that otherwise I could have just kept walking and stuffed the $5 into my pocket.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. One thing I want to build on that, which sort of just came to me, is this concept of, and what we're talking about here is that the main distinction put between progressivism and individualism and conservatism is the idea of equality of opportunity on the one hand, that being that everyone has the opportunity to have the same experiences in life, but whether they choose to pursue those differences or experiences is up to them, versus equality of outcome. Now, equality of outcome tends to be sort of, I'm not in any way saying you're arguing in favour of socialism or communism, but equality of outcome is quite inherent in the Marxist ideology, the concept that we need to ensure that we use social structures to make people equal. It is viewed that society is inherently unequal, and the only way to remedy that is to literally use arbitrary force to make people equal. I want to put to you, Lucas, that this is actually what we do in Freemasonry. Think about it. You join Freemasonry, poor and penniless. You're divested of all your worldly substance, which could have been earned through reasonably support. A capitalist may support the means by which you become materially wealthy. In fact, it's encouraged. But the idea is you're bought into Freemasonry and you're just deconstructed and you're built up to a point where you are told that everyone is equal. There is no choice. We're all going to be equal. You go through the same rituals, you're taught the same lessons, and that is that. I mean, in theory. And the concept is that we all wear dinner suits, sure, we all wear gloves, but it's not a choice on our behalf. We wear those things, and we're branded and uniformed in a way to make a forced equality, regardless of what our actual circumstances may be outside of logic. That seems to be, I wouldn't say progressive, that seems to be more in line with probably anti-individualism in that respect. And it seems to be that concept of forced equality seems to be quite contrary to the ideas that perhaps maybe you're contending Freemasonry is inherently made up of. So
right.
How would you react to that concept?
Well, first I just want to push back a little on Brendan's point earlier about the idea of charity and taking that $5 and that sort of thing. I think it's important to recognise that charity and kindness and acts of giving and those sorts of things are not necessarily tied to political behaviour. And I don't think it's quite fair to say that progressive means giving to others and conservative means being selfish. I mean, many studies have shown that people who identify as conservative give more money to charity than people who identify as progressive. But
I'd like to see those studies, but okay.
But I think it's probably fallacious to try and equate those two things. I think we can all be kind regardless of our political persuasion. In terms of what you were saying, Jack, I agree. I agree 100%. But I don't believe that there's any compulsion in Freemasonry to get the equality of outcome. I think what it sets up very nicely is a meritocracy, beautifully demonstrated by the fact that you can put into Freemasonry as much as you like, and the more you do, the more you will get out of it. Everyone is, of course, treated the same. Everyone's got the same base level, and we're all on the same page. But whether you want to be and one day a worshipful master, or you want to be involved in committees or anything else like that, is up to you. And I think that is definitely individualistic. Masonry just sets up the idea of equality of opportunity, but I don't think it in any way sets up equality of outcome.
Putting this to Brendan now, I mean, you look at the incredible movement that Bernie Sanders fostered in the United States, and to an extent until recently, Jeremy Corbyn in the United Kingdom. This concept of, and we're talking about meritocracy here, it looks like the progressives have taken that as their new, or as their ethos, because the whole idea is that the 1%, or in a capitalist society, this concept that there's always a ruling class, and no matter what you do, no matter how merited you are, if you're starting on the bottom of that ladder, you've got no chance of getting to the top. So would you consider that maybe to be more of an argument in favour of progressivism rather than conservatism?
Look, I think my personal belief is that a meritocracy represents the ideal sort of society or outcome, where people are measured on the value of their contributions, however diverse and unique those contributions might be. There is an inherent value in them that's recognised and respected, because that's ultimately what the fabric of culture is composed of. And I think that the lodge, in that sense, reflects an idealized microcosm of what ultimately is a desirable state of universality,
which is quite progressive.
Exactly. Liberty, equality, fraternity, equal means by which to express and demonstrate inherent talents and all the rest of it. I think the rise of a figure like Bernie Sanders and the corresponding rise of someone like Trump, I think they're very closely related. They're both speaking to a certain surge in populism, but just from different poles. I would suggest that the populism that Bernie Sanders grabbed hold of is possibly a more rigorously argued one in the face of sustained not just inequality but actively deepening the inequality gap. Whereas Trump is just grabbing a white hot bottle of rage that's on a lot of poor people's tables and is making everyone else drink from it. So yeah, look. Ultimately, if only society at large worked more closely with the sort of principles we try to enact within the lodge and between brothers, whether or not that's ever an achievable end is impossible to say. And in a way, on an individual level, it sort of doesn't matter, because so long as you are actively engaging with those ideas, then hopefully, for me, the idea is that your behaviour then becomes a model for others to emulate outside of lodge. So that sort of forbearance, that sort of openness, that sort of charity, patience, and temperance that ideally a Mason comes to embody in their own life stands as a signal, stands as a beacon that others go, there's something about that guy that just seems like he's really on it. He really knows how it works. And is that a progressive act? I don't know.
Building on what you're just saying there, Brendan, and you're talking about Freemasonry being an ideal sort of microcosm of what society should be. I think that there's quite a progressive argument in that. I think the idea of people being treated on a merits basis, a lot of progressives would identify with that quite strongly.
And it's an enabler as well, It's about enabling people to be the best that they're capable of being. And that to me is inseparable from a progressive standpoint.
Absolutely. And I think that if you look at history, and this is where I'd like to get Lucas's feedback as well, when Freemasonry was enacted or sort of prevalent, and we don't know when it was exactly created, but when it was prevalent, it was during a period of time of great change in the way that the world was run. And this concept of electing your leader of your lodge, this concept of electing office bearers, must have been progressive. It must have been a very radical concept, which today, by maybe the sobering of history, has become accepted norm. But surely that indicates the progressive foundations upon which the order is based. This whole idea of meritocracy, equality, this idea of electing your leaders, questioning ideas, moving away from dogma. I think that there's quite a strong argument in favour of that.
Yes, well, I mean, first of all, I'd say I agree with everything Brendan said before about the aspirations of Freemasonry. I don't necessarily think those are either progressive or conservative necessarily, but I think they're absolutely true and one of the most remarkable things about Freemasonry. In terms of going back to the past or when it was sort of incepted, I think, as I mentioned earlier, that it would have been radically progressive at its time, and would have flown in the face of monarchies and authoritarian regimes and all sorts of things, and ties very nicely with the the American system of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which was a radical idea in itself. And you said then that it's not dogmatic. Well, that's very interesting, because what I'm actually arguing is that Freemasonry has become, and as it sits now, is a conservative institution precisely because of that. I completely agree that at a time it was revolutionary, at a time it was progressive, but now, when there are fewer and fewer Freemasons in the world, and those that are in it looking for some sense of tradition and history, I think you'll find that, well, for example, as I mentioned earlier, that there is a dogma to it because it's unchanging. So it may have been revolutionary in the 1700s or 1800s, but the very positions and stances that it takes now could be considered regressive. For example, not allowing women in or anything else like that would be considered regressive by today's standards, but we don't seek change within Freemasonry.
I think that's probably a point that could be contested. I mean, the difficult thing about talking about Freemasonry in such a way is that it exists on a historical continuum where it's been one thing at one time and another thing at another time. And we've all sort of commented here how revolutionary it was at its inception, and you're arguing how sort of, I suppose, in a sense, not stultified, but how it's no longer seen as an engine of social change, or it's not demonstrating a capacity or a willingness to change. And I would question whether or not that's entirely the case, because I think that there's probably a great many Freemasons within the fraternity who are working towards changes of that nature and the very act of tabling the discussion is an attempt to move forward. And they are meeting that inherent conservatism that you're arguing is sort of typical of Freemasonry today. But you wouldn't get, I suspect that you wouldn't get Freemason Victoria appointing as CEO a woman for the first time ever, or the increased presence of women in sort of administrative positions within Freemasonry Victoria, much less the Grand Master openly changing the nature of the conversation about the public face that we present to the wider public of Freemasonry. It suggests to me that there's nothing, like, it may calcify from time to time, and it might get stuck in certain habitual patterns because that's what's worked to protect it or to preserve its integrity. But because it is a living institution, it's composed of living members. There comes a point where, particularly in light of declining membership, where it realizes it has to change. It realizes it has to do things differently, and thank God there's enough life left in it that it can raise those old bones, and it can shed off the old skin and try and embrace a new fate or a new future for itself. So, I think the fact that those sort of steps have been taken is suggestive that, maybe an old conservatism is not necessarily the imminent future of what the fraternity is.
Before you jump in there, Lucas, I do want to say we're going to get to this question of what Freemasonry should be in the future. I think you've set it up brilliantly. But before we do that, there's one last thing that I want to chuck at you both, which I think that you'll both find very interesting, which is this concept that you mentioned before of religion. This concept that we require people to believe or have a faith in a supreme being, which you contended, if you correct me if I'm wrong, Lucas, that's evidence of us supporting what would be considered to be traditional, long-standing institutions. Is that right?
Yes.
Yep. Now, what I want to put to you is that with the requirement for supreme being, and I encourage our listeners to listen to episode 2 of the podcast if you want to know more about this. I've contended in the past that Freemasonry is not a religion, which we all agree on, but it is in fact inherently spiritual. Now, some of the incredible things about what's happening with spirituality these days is it's actually considered to be quite progressive. It's quite contrary to traditional religious institutions, and one of my main contentions is that we shouldn't tie ourselves to the sinking ship of religion, because studies have shown, I've read studies from the United Kingdom relating to Freemasonry, especially the Holy Royal Arch, where it's been contended that one of the biggest issues with perceptions in the public is that we are a religion and that we're tied to organised religion, when in fact you'd probably agree yourself there, Lucas, that a lot of the new members we are getting into Freemasonry are not religiously tied to this conservative religious culture. In fact, they're probably more socially liberal or progressive, to use that word. And in fact, they're embracing types of approaches to ethical thinking that would maybe be considered heresy to a lot of conservatives, let alone religious conservatives. So what's your view on that?
that actually touches on a point that I was going to make on Brendan's position there as well, and that is that I don't think anything about Freemasonry excludes progressive thinking of its members. I don't think that that you have to be a conservative person to get anything out of Freemasonry. What I'm arguing is simply that the institution itself tends to be conservative. But when you're talking about something like that, socially liberal, the moving away from religion and everything else like that, those are the sort of gradual changes, I guess, that we're seeing within Freemasonry. But just look at how slow something like that goes about changing, and how tied originally it was to Judeo-Abrahamic sort of faiths and all that sort of thing, and any other change that we look at might look at making in the future to Freemasonry. I think it's very slow, it's very considered, and it really does come down to that, I guess, question that we're going to ask next, which is, what does the future of Freemasonry hold? And I think most people, most Masons would agree that changing Freemasonry is both very difficult and very slow. And I think that's more evidence of it being conservative institutionally.
Look, I think again we're probably in agreement on a broader set of points than we are in disagreement. But the key thing is that ultimately it will have to change. The more young members that come through who are attracted to it as a means by which to discover or explore their spiritual self, and as Jack said, a great many of these new joinees are socially liberal or liberal-minded people. That can't help but have a net effect. But I think that ultimately it's an important discussion, but it's easily confused between the institutional and the personal, I think. So you're right. There's nothing that prevents progressively minded actions or behaviours, and if there was, it wouldn't be Freemasonry. But equally, I think my argument, my central contention anyway, is that it needn't necessarily be confined to a future of conservatism. Right. I think that there's actually quite a lot of possibilities that are opening up for a new dynamism, for a new sort of progressive attitude from within the fraternity in regards to how it presents to the outside world.
So it sounds like to me that we're talking about history doing a full loop. It starts radical, it starts progressive, it challenges social norms, it ushers in some of the thinking that has underpinned some of the greatest achievements of the enlightened society that we are today over the last few hundred years. I'm not saying it's the reason it's happened, but it was inherently a part of that culture. And as Lucas said, I think you're right, Lucas, to an extent. I think that it really has become quite preservational in that sense. It's become quite conservative. And I guess what you're saying, Brendan, is that the question now becomes, and we'll jump onto this topic, is does that mean that we maybe need to do reverse the cycle, get back to the point in history where we start being agents for cultural change and being leaders for progressive thinking once again, so we can once again have that influence on what is a rapidly changing society? I mean, one example that I thought was fantastic, and I know that we all agree with the majority on this point of view, is what happened in the United States with Georgia and Tennessee. The exclusion of homosexual members on the basis that they were immoral characters, apparently.
Just ridiculous, and those lodges will find themselves on the wrong side of history. I think ultimately.
And I know, and Lucas, just to clarify, you find that just as reprehensible as anyone.
Oh, absolutely. But I also think that that's indicative of something that's entirely antithetical to the principles of Freemasonry we've discussed.
Exactly right.
Yeah,
exactly right. So the question is, where to from here? I'll chuck my 2 cents in, and then I want to get your views. One of the things that I love about this topic is the fact that, in the end, I think the real answer to the question is it's neither inherently conservative or inherently progressive. I think that's the outcome of the conversation, because I think it borrows from the best of those traditions. And one of the best things about Freemasonry is it brings people of all walks of life, traditions, views together. And I would say its principles are universal, and it borrows from, and it is equally applicable to progressive thinking as well as conservative thinking. But I mean, one of the challenges we face is that as an organisation, we have an older membership, we have a rigid structure, and we have a propensity to be scared of adopting and embracing new things. And it looks like when we do embrace new things, we pick the wrong things to embrace. We tend to be, through our timid culture, we tend to embrace things that we think are going to be silver bullets. An example would be in the United States, things like video degrees or one-day classes. It's just, sort of diluting the value of being a Freemason in the first place. I think that the future has to be refounded on a respect for the institutional values that are important, so that would be the conservative aspect, but also a necessary understanding that the way we communicate and brand ourselves needs to be open to a larger group of people. So it embraces both those traditions. But I want to we'll start with Brendan. What do you think the future of Freemasonry needs to be? I mean, in terms of progressivism or conservative, do we need a mix of both, or do we really need to start focusing on opening up and trying new things in terms of that progressive element?
Look, I mean, it's a difficult question to answer. I think ultimately the great stopper to Freemasonry finding universal sort of or greater penetration in society at large is its insistence that it remain a male-only institution, which is personally something that I consider myself a beneficiary of. I like having a space where I can go to be amongst brethren and men. But I think ultimately there is the risk that Freemasonry is curtailing its own future while ever it insists on remaining exclusively male. Now, it's not my position to argue for or against that, but that's just an observation that occurs offhand. And it's probably the one thing that will stop Freemasonry from ever truly being considered a progressive organisation. Now, short of that, which to my mind is probably highly unlikely to ever occur, then Freemasonry really needs to get a better handle on what it is that's confronting young people today, and to step into that initiatory role that's been absent from Western society for a very, 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 very long time, which is where you start to see some really long-term sort of societal impacts where, in the absence of a certain codified or shared experience of what it is to transition from an adolescence into an adult life, then the wheels start to get a bit wobbly on society and culture at large. If Freemasonry is able to sort of crack what that is and start to present itself to younger men as a really viable and vibrant and, dare I say it, progressive means of discovering about yourself and discovering about what you're capable of and what you can be enabled to do, and the riches that can be drawn from that, then that's where you've got a promise of a really vibrant sort of future.
I think you make some excellent points. Lucas, your view on the future of Freemasonry, does it have to be either conservative or progressive, or do you think that there's a role for both elements in that respect?
I think the push and pull in both directions is a healthy thing, but I personally am sort of skeptical of the attempts to maybe change Freemasonry radically. You get that ship of Theseus argument. You can't, keep changing elements of things. You still have the same ship. And I think its intrinsic traditionalism is Freemasonry's strength. I don't see what good it would be to triple our numbers, for example, if we annihilate core elements of our history or our traditions. I think our draw card is our adherence to that history. It's something we should be celebrating. It's something we should be holding on to. And I think it is one of the most attractive things about Freemasonry. There are so many other things that people can do in their spare time that explore, things related maybe more to the modern world and maybe more to modern politics or anything else like that. But Freemasonry, I think, thrives best when it has an unbroken tether to the past, and that we can access that tether and go back through time and learn those lessons and speak the same words that were spoken by Sir Donald Bradman or Graham Kennedy or all these other famous Australians, Sir Edmund Barton, our first Prime Minister, all these other people that have had a huge impact on the world. I think any attempt to radically change Freemasonry in I would suggest, misguided attempt to either improve our numbers, which of course have grown smaller over time, or an attempt to try and make us, I guess, more acceptable to society at large. I think that's a mistake, and I think I would do in my case, I would do whatever I could to preserve what we have.
Well, I don't. Yeah, I don't get me wrong. I don't think that that moving forward into the future for Freemasonry is about jettisoning its traditions or its past, because it's part of the fabric of what Freemasonry is. And let's not forget that from an esoteric perspective, at least, Freemasonry is the keeper of history's mysteries.
Right.
And I think that deep traditionalism or that suggestion of a deep hidden wisdom is a major draw card that's attracting a lot of young people. But I think equally as well, it's new members coming into Freemasonry is sort of like new wine going into old wineskins, and there's a very famous parable in the Bible about that. Those old wineskins will burst. So it's about being progressive enough, to use that already much detested word, that you're flexible and are able to engage in considered novel ways to engage. But I think ultimately you're right. I think that the trappings of Freemasonry are a large part of its appeal, but unless there is a certain animating spirit that is not beholden or subject to those banners and to those words that were spoken by those fine gentlemen that you mentioned, then ultimately it's an empty shell, and to keep it alive does require new ways of thinking and new ways of doing things, as much as we might like the poetry and the pageantry of the past.
Yeah, look, I think
agree.
I think an example, sort of something that I've been reflecting on is, I agree with you. I think the issue of the women in Freemasonry is relevant. We had this discussion last week with our two guests from Le Duarte Main, who highlighted the fact that Freemasonry's principles are universal. And I tend to agree with the fact that men and women could possibly get a lot out of our principles. I don't think it's really based on that concept. I think it's just organisationally, and the political history of Grand Lodges has made it a women's only organisation, but a man's only organisation. But I think the main thing, like you said, we need to concede that's not going to change. But one area which I think there is room for improvement is the way in which we approach people from our requirement for a belief in a supreme being. We really do make the mistake of putting all people who are not a part of organised religion in the same basket as anti-theists, atheists. I mean, I dislike the word atheist because people don't understand what it actually means. It means to be anti-theist, anti-religion, right?
No, I would dispute that. I would say that an atheist is someone who actually believes there is an absence of God.
Yes, yeah.
Whereas anti-theism is a much more sort of emotive position against the ills of organised religion at its most extreme manifestations.
But I think that the mistake we make is we put people all into that extreme category. Now, I understand that the ancient charges say that we don't accept atheists, which is fair enough. I understand that that's something that we'd probably have to live with, especially with the United Grand Lodge of England not recognising lodges that do abrogate that requirement. But one thing that we don't focus on is agnosticism, this concept that just because someone may not know the answers to the universe's questions, that doesn't mean they're necessarily not believing in it or capable of believing in a supreme being. Now, I think there's a huge gap in society. There's hunger for enlightenment, and they don't want to do it for an organised religion, and they're not willing to commit themselves to a blind faith in a supreme being, necessarily in the traditional sense. So I think that there's room there for us to really, as a forward-looking organisation, as well as respecting our traditions, to really open that up. You can be a good person and not be a Christian, Jew, Buddhist, Hindu, Islamic, Muslim. You can be a good person and be agnostic or be unsure. I'd like to get your views on maybe that's somewhere where we can sort of employ some of these sort of forward-looking ideas.
Well, I guess a question would be, not a great deal of it, but some of our ceremony and some of our I guess as Brendan was calling it, pageantry, does reflect and refer to God. And I wonder if someone was agnostic, for example, would they feel comfortable if they were repeating those things or being involved in those things?
Well, I don't
And
think
is that
they're
something-
adverse to God, are they? I think they're just unsure as to whether or not they're willing to commit to his existence. I mean, the concept of a higher power, I think, is an interesting idea. What that means to the individual is up to them. I think our rituals are very open to interpretation in that respect. For example, I'm not overly religious. Probably call myself a cultural Christian, but that's probably by virtue of the fact that I've been brought up in a Western society. But when references are made to the great architect of the universe or God, I merely see that as a allegory for a higher power. That's how I interpret it. Yeah.
I sort of tend to think of it in terms of a holism or a totality of which I'm a part of.
Yeah, the cosmos would be a good example of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the notion of the traditional notion of a personified deity is something that a lot of particularly young people have real trouble with. Now, I think that is different to a personal relationship with divinity, but it's often confused as one and the same thing. But I think that there's a lot of people out there who consider themselves animists, or even Wiccans. There's a great diversity of belief, and I think that for all of Freemasonry's tolerance or acceptance of many diverse faiths, they do tend to be from those monotheistic, the classically defined systems, religious systems, and I do think that is that's just a cultural hangover in a sense, particularly when you consider the deep historical connection or the suggestion, at least, of lineage between far more esoteric teachings of the mystery schools and its far broader, very, very different conception of divinity as being something that's directly accessible to individuals. I think that there's a lot of people who are looking for that, and that's a great opportunity for Freemasonry, for esoteric Freemasonry, to act as a signal light to draw people to what are very valuable.
And I completely agree with that. And, I guess for the purposes of this podcast, I've sort of had to take a opposing view for the sake of a good debate. But certainly on that point, I'm inclined to agree. And I think one can have, for example, an appreciation, as you described, Jack, of a cultural Christian. When we talk about the biblical allegory that we deal with in Freemasonry and everything else like that, you can have an academic understanding of that. You can have you can see it as parable and metaphor and all that sort of thing without necessarily having to ascribe to a rigid belief system around it. And I also completely agree that there are people who are atheist, agnostic, whatever else, who are perfectly good, moral, upstanding people. So I guess if I am going to take the opposing view, all I would say is one would have to be careful not to... this is a slippery slope kind of argument, but then do we start removing references to the grand architect of the universe because that might be unfair on some of the people that declare themselves atheist or agnostic or things like that?
It's deeply unfair to engineers. I know that the great engineer of the universe. Look, I think in terms of this discussion, the great architect of the universe and the grand geometrician, these are beautiful symbolic representations of an unknowable process or level of being that we're sort of bound in with.
Yeah, beyond human contemplation. Yeah.
But precisely. I mean, you can only ever approach it. You can't really touch whatever the divine really is. But I think that there are ways that Freemasonry could make more available beyond the maps, beyond those sort of basic lectures and handouts. There could be stronger ways in which the real esoteric heart of Freemasonry could be communicated to those who are interested in joining, without giving away anything. You can talk quite openly in the language of the mysteries if you know how to go about that.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do with this podcast. It's the concept of being able to engage people in a way that doesn't ruin any surprises, doesn't break any obligations, but sort of gives them an idea of some of the sort of topics and concepts and challenges and ideas that deep moral teachings and esoteric elements that influence our tradition, our craft. And I think one of the most profound things that was said in an interview that I had with an American Freemason, worshipper brother Jason Mitchell, 2 weeks ago, was that he said that the whole guiding aim of Rosicrucianism is to bridge that divide between religion and science, bringing these traditions together. And I mean, I think that's quite applicable to Freemasonry. I mean, it's not saying one is better than the other or one is more wrong or right. It's about bridging the gap in terms of understanding, accepting the fact that there are scientific discoveries and understandings, and there are religious, esoteric, moral, philosophical understandings of the world as well. And I think you've both hit that nail on the head. And I think with that, it's good to end a contested discussion on a point of agreement. I disagree. That's fantastic. And I think what we'll do is I'm going to give you both your last word in favour of your individual perspectives, so our listeners can sort of walk away and think about it themselves. And if you do have a view on this issue, please, when we post our Facebook status with the link to the episode, comment below your views. Even if it's as simple as saying, I agree with Lucas, it is conservative, or I agree with Brendan, it is inherently progressive. Or if you don't agree with either of us, tell us why. We'll gladly love to read those views. But we'll go to the final word, and we'll start off with Lucas.
Sure. Look, I believe Masonry is inherently conservative, and I believe that is one of its core strengths. I think we love it for the fact that it is relatively rigid, relatively unchanged, and offers this wonderful tether and connection to the past. I hope that never changes. I think I know a lot of Masons as well would resist very forcefully any attempt to change that, and I think it's something we should be absolutely proud of in a much changing and fast-paced, globalized world. Freemasonry offers something a little more stable and a little more tethered and anchored in history.
Okay, and thank you for that, and we'll go to Brendan for his last word.
And look, no one's denying the value of Freemasonry's deep history and particularly the timelessness of its symbolism. I think that it's important to recognise that although it may currently present as a inherently conservative organisation, it's important to remember that it is a living organisation with a capacity to change if it so desires. And it may well find itself having to do that sooner rather than later, as it may hope to. And the great challenge for Freemasonry is to be able to navigate that change without losing what makes it so valuable, which is its history and its traditions, but finding new ways to express and to communicate and to reach out to people who might otherwise have written off Freemasonry as an irrelevancy.
And yeah, look, I think you made both very good points, and thank you very much for that final word, Brendan, and thank you very much for that final word, Lucas. And look, let me just say, on behalf of the Brought to Light Masonic podcast, thank you very much for taking the time to come on today, both of you, and for putting together such incredible arguments. I hope our listeners got a lot out of it. I know I did. The question about Freemasonry, and its traditions and concepts relating to the influence of some of these sort of political philosophy is very interesting. It's not touched on very often, but I think you guys did a good job at it. So thank you very much for lending us your time. And welcome back from that interview with Brother Lucas Crandles and Brother Brendan McCallum. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. I thought it was a fantastic discussion. Brother Lucas spoke very well, and Brother Brendan, although he had a tough job, I think the topic was sort of a bit skewed towards Lucas. I think he came back quite well, and it was good to see a healthy discussion about what is Freemasonry. I mean, that's what this whole podcast is about, bringing you to light by discussing research papers and discussions about Freemasonry. The best way to understand what Freemasonry is to talk about some aspects of it. And one of those aspects is it conservative? Is it progressive? I think the real answer to that question is it's neither inherently conservative nor inherently progressive. It embraces the best of those traditions because, as we've all discussed in the interview that you just heard, it is an established organisation. It has conservative tendencies to some regard, but it's also quite progressive in the sense that it promotes some very forward-thinking ideas. I hope you enjoyed that interview, and Paul, I hope you got something out of that, something a bit different for an entered apprentice to hear.
Yeah, I took a lot out of that, Jack. It's good hearing these conversations. You get to learn things that you wouldn't normally.
Exactly right, seeing some different perspectives. And mind you, Lucas only joined the craft about 1.5 years ago, and Brendan only joined about 2 years ago. So it's not like they've been around forever, but they still have these really well-researched and well-thought-out opinions. So it's really good, the journey that you can take. Just before we get into some news and some other discussion, I want to do a shout-out for Brother Fina Naraja and Brother Shern Leong, and all the people out there, and all the brethren actually out there who form the Maroondah Blue Lounge Social Club, who successfully launched their club on the 3rd of September at the Inner Eastern Masonic Centre here in Victoria. It was a fantastic event. There was about 65 to 70 young Masons, their partners and friends, and the night was just incredible. It was electric. The Blue Lounge Social Club is becoming a real success, and that's because of you, the listeners out there, the supporters, the Freemasons and brethren who have really embraced the idea of not change, but innovation, the idea that we can support young people and young brethren in a way that's going to be forward-thinking and embracing the future, whilst also respecting the landmarks and traditions of our great organisation. So congratulations to Brother Fina and all the guys out there who put on a spectacular event. We're very excited about where you guys are heading, and we're looking forward to the future. And Paul, you were there on the night. I know you brought your partner along, and you had a great night. Did you enjoy it? It felt good in the room there?
Yeah, it was good fun, Jack, because I wasn't even aware that they were all Blue Lounge members. I walked in, I thought it was one of them lodge/Blue Lounge meetings, but as soon as you told me, I couldn't believe it. There was amazing turnout, and there was amazing quality people in the room. It's
always good. And talking about the Blue Lounge, our next event is actually going to be a launch party as well, which is going to be on the 7th of October. And it's going to be held in Traralgon here in country Victoria. And it's going to be the launch of the Greater Gippsland Region Blue Lounge Social Club, which is headed up by Brother Simon Reynolds, no relation to the Grand Master, but still similar last name, who will be heading up, who's head up the club out that way, and also his fantastic secretary, Worshipful Brother, one of the very few Worshipful Brothers in the Blue Lounge, Worshipful Brother Robert Billing. And these guys have done incredible work already. They've put together some great resources. They've got Masonic reps appointed right across a huge district that covers a huge part of Victoria. I think they joked the other night it covers half the state. And in particular, they've already been visiting first degree. So it's fantastic, and we look forward to being there to support you, Brother Simon, and all the brethren out in the Greater Gippsland area. And for the brethren who are interested in heading up, we do have accommodation. So if you are in the city, like me in Melbourne, and you'd like to stay up in Traralgon, Brother Jordan Mercer has organised, with his accommodation that he owns up there, free of charge, a space for about 20 to 25 people to sort of bring a mattress or a blow-up bed and stay at a house down there, which would be fantastic. So if you want to come up and support the Blue Lounge and meet some of the people from the Brought to Light Masonic podcast and support, more importantly, regional Freemasons making a real difference in their area, then come on up on the 7th of October and support the Greater Gippsland region launch. And I'm looking very much forward to it. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that the Blue Lounge Social Club is also launching, in conjunction with the Brought to Light Masonic podcast, a fantastic new initiative, and it's called the Education Packs. And Education Packs are what we see to be a gap filler. I mean, in Victoria, we're very lucky. Freemasons Victoria provides a fantastic MAP session or Masonic Advancement Program. They also promote education for other means. But we're finding that brethren are having trouble, especially who belong to smaller lodges where they don't have mentors. They're having trouble getting the chance to memorise their questions and answers that they're supposed to learn between the degrees. We've thought that we'd put something together to assist them with that, and also to assist mentors in sort of getting in touch with their younger mentees. But before we get on to the specifics of what the Education Pack is, Paul, you're currently an entered apprentice. I think your second degree is going to be March next year. You've attended one of the MAP sessions with Worshipful Brother Jim Tolk, who did an excellent job alongside Brother Steve Austin.
Yep.
So how have you found the education experience so far, and how have the Education Packs already sort of had an impact in helping you?
It's been very quick. I'm lucky that the Education Pack was released as quick as it was, because I was a bit overwhelmed at the time. The resources are all good and they're all there, and I did learn a lot. But the Education Pack just gives you that extra punch to make sure you get through it without any problems. Yeah,
hopefully it clarifies some of those ideas. You see a first degree or experience it, And the interview and part of that pack is actually the interview that I had with Worshipful Brother James Tog. Hopefully that conversation, people have found it helpful, especially for people who've just done their first degree. So I'm glad that helped. The other thing that we've put together in this pack is a seminar that I run. It goes for about 7 minutes. It's where I run through the questions and answers that we require candidates to remember between the degrees. And then I also just give the candidates an opportunity to answer the questions by asking the questions, giving about a 20-second pause between each question and giving them a chance to sort of fill the gaps. Has that helped you in, rather than reading it, has that helped you a little bit?
I learn a lot differently to a lot of people. I like to hear the questions I'm asked and answer the questions accordingly. So it works really well for me as far as learning.
Yeah, so I mean, sometimes listening to it's easier. Some people like to read, so it depends. But that's available. And also in the pack, we have a couple of articles. One by the Victorian Lodge of Research regarding the first degree, and also a couple of other articles about the first degree, which sort of gives a take on the first degree outside of the traditional education stuff that you're given by Grand Lodges. In no way does it, is it irregular. It's just other regular Freemasons writing articles and providing a different perspective. The other thing we have is a second degree pack, and that does the same thing, but except in this pack, you also, aside from the seminar, which will answer the questions between the second and third degree, you also get a recording of the Brought to Light Masonic podcast episode with Worshipful Brother James Tog, where we discuss the degree, some articles as well, and also some videos from YouTube that address some of the questions about the hidden mysteries of nature and science, which is not Masonic in nature, these videos, but they're very interesting in the sense they get you to think outside the square. So also we have a third degree pack, which is available for people after they finish their third degree, where it concludes the episode that we hosted with Worshipful Brother Brendan Kine, and it also has a couple of articles and a few other things that are real handy to people who have just finished that big degree, which is the third degree. The other thing we've also put together is a mentors pack, and in that pack, it's actually probably our most comprehensive pack. It has a very comprehensive mentors guide that was written by a few brethren out in the eastern suburbs, which is fantastic. It has some notes, some education notes, some handbooks, all sorts of things that mentors can use to really make the most of their mentoring experience. We're finding that the disconnect between some older mentors and younger brethren is probably growing. Younger guys are not being engaged in the same way that's traditionally been working. And alternatively, we're finding a lot of young guys are becoming mentors. So to be able to help young Masons harness that potential by giving them some support is also worthwhile. Thank you to all the brethren overseas in the United Kingdom, the United States, and the rest who have really reached out to get access to these packs. Although they're probably not compatible with your jurisdiction because the questions and answers might be different, we're still willing to send them to you. If you need us to produce a pack for you, we're happy to do it. I'll custom record a pack if need be. Just so our listeners also know, these packs aren't just given out, freely. We require that if you want to access the pack, especially if you're a member here in Victoria, that you provide a copy or a photo of your Masonic passport that only Freemasons have. It has to be filled in and signed by the secretary of your lodge. And once we get proof that you're in that degree, we'll send you the pack. And we ask that you don't send it to other people, and it's all in a secure link and the rest. So in saying that, it's education, promoting Freemasonry in a way that is engaging the techniques of the 21st century. So if you are interested in receiving a pack, send an email to contact@blue.fmvic.com. Alternatively, you can jump on our Facebook, facebook.com/BlueLandVic, and you can follow us and get some material and updates from there. I believe that's everything we had on our list. It's been a great episode, and it's been great to catch up with you all. I hope our listeners are enjoying the content. Over the next month, we're actually going to go into the next stage of recording. We're going to start recording our next set of episodes. And I can flag that September, or the rest of September at the very least, is going to be practical month. We're going to put together episodes that focus on the practicalities of Freemasonry. So you can expect episodes that will be discussing leadership and what it's like to develop your leadership skills in an organisation like Freemasons Victoria or any other Grand Lodge. We'll have an episode on ritual and how to remember ritual and make the most of your ritualistic experiences. And we'll also look at things like taking office. The next step after you become a Master Mason, what do you do? It's the journey over. What else is available? And if we're really lucky, we may even get some people in to discuss some of the other orders that are available, the appendic orders in Freemasonry. In October, we're going to be calling it Innovation Month, and you'll be hearing more about that. I won't reveal too much now, but be excited because we want to talk about the future of Freemasonry, and we want to get as many people, international and domestic, to really come together and put their brains together and think about some exciting ideas for the future of Freemasonry generally. So keep your ears listening for that. I think that wraps it up, Paul. So thank you very much for coming on the Brought to Light Masonic podcast for the first time, and thank you for all the work you do behind the scenes to make the podcast possible.
Oh, it's a pleasure being here, Jack.
That's good. Well, once again, thank you very much for listening to the Brought to Light Masonic podcast for another week. This has been episode 11, Is Freemasonry Inherently Conservative? I'm your host, Brother Jack Aquilina, and we'll speak to you next week.
You've been listening to the Brought to Light Masonic podcast, bringing you to light through discussions and research papers about Australian Freemasonry and the Victorian jurisdiction in particular. We look forward to speaking to you on our next edition, and until then, we are happy to meet, sorry to part, and happy to meet again.